The fluorescent lights hummed their familiar tune in the 42nd floor conference room of Meridian Industries, casting harsh shadows across polished mahogany and faces carved from corporate stone. Outside, Manhattan stretched endlessly beneath a pewter sky, its pulse hidden behind bulletproof glass that cost more than most people's annual salaries. Inside, the air crackled with the kind of tension that comes before someone's world collapses. "The budget cuts are non-negotiable," Richard Blackstone's voice cut through the silence like a scalpel through silk. The CEO's weathered hands, adorned with a platinum wedding band that caught the light with every gesture, drummed against the table's surface. "We need to trim 15% from operational costs by quarter's end." Around the oval table, 12 board members shifted in their leather chairs, a collection of silver-haired predators in $1,000 suits, their eyes reflecting the cold mathematics of profit margins. The quarterly report spread before them told a story of dipping revenues and shareholder anxiety, each red number a nail in someone's coffin. "Sir," ventured Patricia Chen, the head of human resources, her voice barely above a whisper, "the janitorial staff, they're already stretched thin. These are good people, families who—" "Good people don't pay dividends," interrupted board member Harrison Walsh, his Boston accent sharp as winter wind. "We're not running a charity, Patricia. Every unnecessary position is money hemorrhaging from our pockets." But in the far corner of the room, tucked between a potted orchid and an abstract painting worth more than a house, someone else was listening. Isabella Blackstone pressed herself against the ventilation grate she'd discovered 3 weeks ago during one of her late-night explorations of her father's corporate kingdom. At 19, with eyes the color of storm clouds and her mother's defiant chin, she'd learned that the most important conversations in her world happened behind closed doors. She shouldn't be here. Columbia University's winter break had ended yesterday, and she was supposed to be in advanced corporate ethics. Oh, the irony. But something had drawn her back to these sterile halls where her childhood had been spent in conference rooms and corner offices, watching her father build an empire one acquisition at a time. "The night shift can be eliminated entirely," Walsh continued, consulting his tablet with the enthusiasm of a medieval executioner. "Automation systems can handle basic security monitoring, and we can contract cleaning services on a per-need basis. More efficient, less overhead." Isabella's breath fogged the metal grate as she pressed closer. She knew those night shift workers, had known them since she was 7 years old and would hide in her father's office during his endless meetings. There was Miguel Santos, who taught her Spanish curse words and always had butterscotch candies in his cart. There was Dorothy Kim, who sang Korean lullabies while polishing the marble floors, her voice echoing through empty hallways like a ghost from another world. And then there was Marcus Johnson. The memory hit her with unexpected force. 10 years old, tears streaming down her face after a brutal day at prep school where Madison Hartwell had announced to the entire 4th grade that her mother had died because even money can't fix crazy. She'd hidden in the supply closet on the 38th floor, surrounded by industrial cleaning chemicals and the familiar smell of pine sol that somehow felt more like home than the mansion in the Hamptons. Marcus had found her there at midnight, his tall frame filling the doorway like a gentle giant, his dark eyes concerned behind his glasses. He was maybe 25 then, young for the night shift, but old enough to understand that sometimes children need salvation from their own privilege. "Little bird," he said, settling his lanky frame on the floor beside her, his gray uniform immaculate despite 8 hours of work. "Rough day on the tower?"
She'd told him everything. About Madison, about the whispers that followed her through marble halls at home, about how everyone treated her like she might shatter if they spoke too loudly. Marcus had listened without judgment, occasionally nodding while he organized supplies. "You know what I learned working these floors?" he'd said finally. "Every single person up here, From your daddy down to the folks who empty waste baskets, we're all just trying to figure it out. Some of us wear fancier clothes while we do it, but everybody's got something that keeps them awake at night. He'd pulled out a small notebook from his shirt pocket. She could see it now, leather-bound with pages yellow from use, and showed her columns of numbers written in careful, precise handwriting. "This is my daughter's college fund," he'd explained. "Every night I work here, I add a little more. Some nights it's just $5, sometimes $20 if I pick up extra hours. But you see this?" He pointed to a number at the bottom of the page, $3,247.83. That's hope written in blue ink. That's my Maya getting to become whatever she dreams of becoming. Isabella had stopped crying then, fascinated by this glimpse into a world where hope could be quantified, where love was measured in overtime hours and late-night conversations with lonely children of CEOs. "She's 7 now," Marcus had continued, producing a worn photograph from his wallet. A beautiful little girl with gap-toothed grin and pigtails, sitting in what looked like a library reading corner. Smart as a whip, that one. Reads at a high school level already. Last week, she told me she wants to be an engineer and build bridges that connect different countries. His laugh was warm, tired, but infinitely proud. She doesn't see barriers, just possibilities. Now, crammed in this ventilation space, listening to men in expensive suits discuss Marcus Johnson like he was a line item on a spreadsheet, Isabella felt that same helpless rage she'd experienced as a child. But she wasn't 10 years old anymore. The overnight custodial staff represents approximately $47,000 in annual savings, Walsh was saying, his finger tracing across his tablet screen like he was playing some twisted video game. Johnson, Santos, Kim, Rodriguez, the core 4, can be terminated by Friday. Their responsibilities can be distributed across day shift personnel or eliminated entirely through technological solutions. "Marcus Johnson has been with us for 15 years, Patricia Chen interjected, her voice stronger now. "His performance reviews are exemplary. He's never missed a day, never had a single complaint. He's put 2 daughters through college already and has a 3rd starting next year. This man is the backbone of—" "Patricia?" Richard Blackstone's voice carried the weight of final judgment. "I appreciate your concern for individual circumstances, but we can't make decisions based on sob stories. The board has responsibilities to shareholders, not to every employee with personal financial challenges." Isabella's hands clenched into fists. Her father, the man who taught her to ride a bike in the circular driveway of their estate, who'd read her bedtime stories about brave princesses who saved kingdoms, was about to destroy the life of someone who'd shown her more genuine kindness than most people she'd ever encountered. "Besides," added board member Victoria Lang, adjusting her pearl necklace with practiced indifference, "custodial work isn't exactly skilled labor. These people can find equivalent employment anywhere. It's not like we're terminating engineers or department heads." The words hit Isabella like a slap. She thought about Marcus's notebook, his careful calculations, his daughter's college fund, built $5 at a time. She thought about how he'd know every person's name on the night shift, how he'd cover extra duties when someone was sick, how he'd trained 3 different people to use the floor buffing machines that kept Meridian's marble lobby gleaming. But mostly, she thought about Maya Johnson, now 17 and probably filling out college applications, her future suddenly balanced on the edge of a corporate knife. The meeting was winding down, board members already shifting their attention to lunch reservations and afternoon tea times. If you're enjoying this intense corporate drama, please
take a moment to like this video and share it with others who appreciate stories of courage standing up to power. In another few minutes, they'd vote, and 4 families would wake up tomorrow morning with their worlds completely changed, never knowing that their fates had been decided by people who'd never learned their names, never heard their stories,
never seen their hope written in blue ink. Isabella made a decision that would change everything. She crawled backward through the ventilation shaft, her heart pounding so hard she was sure the entire boardroom could hear it. The metal creaked softly as she moved, but the voices continued below, discussing implementation timelines and severance packages with the same enthusiasm they might use to discuss the weather. 3 minutes later, she was smoothing her designer jeans and adjusting her Columbia University sweatshirt in the bathroom mirror outside the conference room. Her reflection stared back, storm gray eyes filled with determination, her mother's stubborn chin set in a way that had terrified nannies and prep school teachers for years. She checked her phone. 11:47 a.m. The vote was scheduled for noon. Isabella Blackstone, daughter of privilege and inheritor of corporate kingdoms, walked to the conference room door and knocked 3 times, firm, confident, and utterly final. The conversations inside stopped abruptly. Wait, I need to expand this section to reach the 2,000+ word target before continuing. Let me add more depth to the opening and character development. Marcus Johnson stood in the supply room on the 38th floor, the same room where he'd found a crying 10-year-old Isabella Blackstone nearly a decade ago. The fluorescent light flickered overhead, casting intermittent shadows across shelves stocked with industrial cleaners, paper towels, and the accumulated tools of invisible labor. In his hands he held that same leather notebook, though now the pages were more yellow, the cover more worn, and the numbers significantly larger. Maya's college fund, $23,847.93. His youngest daughter would start at NYU in the fall, majoring in engineering just as she'd dreamed since she was 7. The acceptance letter was pinned to the refrigerator at home, surrounded by photos of graduation ceremonies. Keisha from Howard University, now working as a social worker in Harlem. Carmen from Pace, teaching 3rd grade in the Bronx. 3 daughters, 3 different paths, all leading away from the night shift existence that had defined Marcus's adult life. Not that he regretted a single hour of it. At 39, Marcus had found peace in the rhythm of night work. While the corporate world slept, he moved through Meridian Industries like a guardian of empty spaces, ensuring that each morning brought pristine perfection to people who never saw the labor that created their sterile paradise. The marble floors that gleamed under his careful ministrations, the windows that sparkled despite Manhattan's persistent grime, the conference rooms that sat ready for meetings that would shape markets and change lives, all of it bore his invisible signature. He'd started here when Maya was 2, just after his ex-wife had decided that single parenting wasn't for her and disappeared into the Florida sunset with a drummer from a beach band. 3 daughters under the age of 12, a high school diploma, and no family support had narrowed his options considerably. But Meridian's night shift offered stability, health insurance, steady hours, and the kind of honest work that let him look his daughters in the eye when they asked what Daddy did for a living. "I keep important places running," he'd tell them, which wasn't entirely a lie. The other night shift workers had become his chosen family over the years. Miguel Santos, 10 years his senior, whose wife sent homemade tamales every Christmas and who knew more about the building's quirks than the maintenance supervisor. Dorothy Kim, whose husband had died 3 years ago, leaving her with twin boys to raise and a fierce determination to make her own way in the world. Carlos Rodriguez, 24 and working nights to pay for community college classes, dreams of accounting dancing in his head while he emptied wastebaskets and vacuumed executive carpeting. They were a crew of ghosts, really. Present but unseen, essential but unacknowledged. The kind of people who kept civilization functioning while the visible world slept, dreamed, and planned its next conquest. Marcus closed the notebook and slipped it back into his shirt pocket. His shift started in 8 hours, but he'd come in early today to stock supplies and prepare for the weekend deep cleaning schedule. The building would be mostly empty, just security guards and maybe a few workaholics burning the midnight oil, which meant he could work without the careful choreography required when the daytime world was present. He didn't know that 44 floors above his head, his future was being decided by people who'd never learned his name. The knock on the conference room door cut through the corporate atmosphere like a fire alarm. Every head turned toward the sound, 12 pairs of eyes reflecting varying degrees of annoyance, curiosity, and in Richard Blackstone's case, dawning recognition mixed with paternal dread. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Isabella said. as she pushed open the heavy door, her voice carrying the kind of confidence that comes from 19 years of preparation for moments exactly like this. "But I need to speak with the board about the proposed budget cuts." The silence that followed was absolute. Patricia Chen's mouth opened slightly. Walsh's tablet slipped from his fingers, clattering against the mahogany table. Victoria Lang's hand froze halfway to her coffee cup, pearl bracelet catching the harsh fluorescent light. Richard Blackstone's face cycled through expressions like a broken slideshow: surprise, embarrassment, anger, and finally, resignation. He'd seen that look in his daughter's eyes before. The same expression she'd worn at age 5 when she'd decided to give away her entire toy collection to the children's shelter, or at 12 when she'd organized a protest against the prep school's unfair detention policies. "Isabella," he said, his voice carefully controlled, "this is a private board meeting. You shouldn't—" "With respect, Dad, this is exactly where I should be. Because what you're discussing affects people I care about, and they don't have anyone else in this room to speak for them." Board member Walsh recovered first, his Boston accent sharp with indignation. "Mr. Blackstone, surely you can control your own—" "Careful," Isabella's voice dropped to a register that would have made her prep school debate coaches proud. "I'm 19, not 9. I'm a legal adult, a shareholder in this company through my trust fund, and I have every right to address this board on matters affecting Meridian Industries employees." She moved to the empty chair at the foot of the table, the one reserved for presentations, and sat down with the kind of natural authority that made several board members unconsciously straighten their postures. "I've been listening to your discussion about eliminating the night shift custodial staff, and I'd like to share some information that might influence your decision." Victoria Lang's laugh was brittle as breaking ice. "Dear, I'm sure you mean well, but business decisions can't be made based on sentiment. These are complex financial considerations that, like the fact that Marcus Johnson has saved this company approximately $47,000 over the past 5 years through his efficiency improvements and cost reduction suggestions, or that Dorothy bilingual skills have helped us avoid 3 separate lawsuits from Korean clients whose complaints were initially misunderstood by day shift personnel." The room went quiet again. But this time, it was the silence of professionals recognizing that they were dealing with someone who'd done her homework. Isabella had spent every weekend of her senior year of high school in these corporate halls, ostensibly doing volunteer service hours required for graduation, but actually learning the building's rhythms and the stories of people who worked in its shadows. What had started as teenage rebellion against her father's neglect had evolved into something deeper, a genuine understanding of how an organization really functioned versus how it appeared to function on quarterly reports. Miguel Santos identified and reported the HVAC inefficiency on floors 20 through 25, she continued, consulting notes on her phone with the same casual confidence her father displayed during shareholder presentations. His suggestion to adjust the overnight temperature controls has reduced our energy costs by 12% annually. That's roughly $32,000 in savings per year. Patricia Chen leaned forward, her expression shifting from defensive to interested. "How do you know these figures?" "Because I asked," Isabella replied, simply. "I spent time with the night shift crew, learned what they actually do, tracked their contributions that never make it into performance reviews or budget considerations. Carlos Rodriguez caught the water leak in the East Wing basement 6 months before it would have caused structural damage, potentially saving us hundreds of thousands in repairs and lawsuits." Board member Thomas Wright, who'd remained silent through most of the meeting, spoke for the first time. "Even if these individual contributions have value, the bottom line remains unchanged. We need to reduce operational costs, and personnel expenses are our largest controllable variable." Isabella turned to face him directly, her storm gray eyes reflecting something that made the veteran businessman shift uncomfortably in his chair. "Mr. Wright, what's your salary?" The question hung in the air like incense in a cathedral, thick and impossible to ignore. "I beg your pardon?" "Your annual compensation as a board member. It's public record, so I can look it up, but I'm curious if you know the number off the top of your head. Wright's face reddened slightly. That's hardly relevant to $250,000, Isabella supplied helpfully, plus benefits, plus stock options, plus per-meeting fees that average out to about $4,000 for each monthly gathering like this one. She gestured around the table. The total compensation for all 12 board members is approximately $3.2 million annually. The mathematics hung in the air, visible and uncomfortable. The combined salaries of the 4 night shift custodial workers you want to eliminate total $47,000, less than 1/5 of what this company pays a single board member, less than what some of you spend on your vacation home's annual maintenance. Richard Blackstone's voice carried a warning tone. Isabella, you're oversimplifying complex, is I? She turned to face her father, and for a moment the corporate princess facade dropped away, revealing something raw and genuine beneath. Dad, do you remember when I was 10 and hid in the supply closet crying because kids at school said terrible things about Mom? The personal reference sent visible ripples of discomfort around the table. Richard's jaw tightened. That's not appropriate for... Marcus Johnson found me there. He sat with me on the floor of that supply closet for 2 hours. He didn't try to fix my problems or give me corporate solutions. He just listened to a scared little girl and helped her understand that everybody, rich or poor, powerful or powerless, struggles with something. She stood up, moving to the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a god's-eye view of Manhattan's endless sprawl. He showed me his notebook that night, his daughter's college fund, tracked penny by penny. Every overtime hour, every extra shift, every sacrifice documented in blue ink because hope requires precision. She turned back to face the table. That little girl he was saving for? Her name is Maya Johnson. She's 17 now, valedictorian of her high school class, accepted to NYU's engineering program with partial scholarships, but still needing help with the remaining costs. Isabella reached into her pocket and pulled out a photograph, printed from social media, slightly wrinkled from handling. She placed it on the conference table where everyone could see. A young black woman in graduation regalia, beaming beside a tall man in a careful pressed shirt and tie, his wire-rimmed glasses slightly crooked, his smile proud enough to power the entire building. Maya wants to design infrastructure for developing countries, Isabella said quietly. She spent 4 years volunteering with Habitat for Humanity, learning construction techniques, studying engineering principles through online courses. She sees problems and imagines solutions. She looks at broken things and dreams of fixing them. The photograph seemed to demand attention, drawing eyes like a magnet. In its borders, the abstract mathematics of budget cuts gained human dimensions, developed faces and names and futures that stretched beyond quarterly reports. But none of that matters if her father loses his job 6 months before her freshman year starts. None of her potential, her dreams, her contributions to society matter if we decide that custodial work isn't skilled labor, that 15 years of dedication and reliability can be erased with a spreadsheet calculation. Board member Lang shifted in her chair, her pearl necklace catching the light as she moved. Miss Blackstone, while your passion is admirable, business decisions require return on investment? Let me tell you about ROI. Marcus Johnson has trained 17 different employees over his 15 years here. When the day shift supervisor quit suddenly in 2019, Marcus stepped in and managed both shifts for 3 weeks without additional compensation, preventing a complete breakdown in building maintenance. When we had the COVID outbreak in 2021, he voluntarily worked extra hours to implement enhanced cleaning protocols, probably saving us millions in liability and productivity losses. She paused, letting the information sink in. Dorothy Kim speaks 4 languages and has served as informal translator for international clients on dozens of occasions. She's prevented miscommunications that could have cost us contracts. Miguel Santos knows every pipe, wire, and ventilation shaft in this building better than our contracted maintenance crew. He solved problems in 15 minutes that outside contractors would have taken hours and charged thousands to fix. Carlos Rodriguez is 2 semesters away from his accounting degree and has already identified several bookkeeping discrepancies that saved us audit complications. Patricia Chen was taking notes now, her expression thoughtful. These contributions, they're not reflected in our performance evaluation system. Because our performance evaluation system doesn't measure the things that actually matter. It measures compliance, attendance, absence of complaints. It doesn't measure problem-solving, initiative, institutional knowledge, or the human connections that keep organizations functioning. She walked back to her chair, but remained standing, her hands resting on the leather back. Every single person you're planning to eliminate has spent years becoming invisible experts in keeping this building operational. They've developed relationships with security, with maintenance, with the few executives who work late hours. They know which elevators make unusual sounds, which offices have temperamental heating systems, which conference rooms need extra attention before important meetings.
The room was quieter now, the aggressive energy of earlier budget discussions replaced by something more contemplative. You want to replace them with automation and contracted services, Isabella continued. But automation can't improvise when problems arise. Contract services can't provide institutional memory or personal accountability. You'll save $47,000 in salaries and spend twice that much dealing with the inefficiencies, mistakes, and problems that arise when you replace experienced humans with cheaper alternatives. Richard Blackstone finally spoke, his voice careful and controlled. Isabella, even if your points have merit, the board has fiduciary responsibilities. We can't base decisions on individual stories when the company's financial health is at stake. Isabella smiled then, the expression sharp as winter sunlight. Then let's talk about financial health, she said. Let's talk about the real numbers. Isabella reached into her Columbia University backpack and pulled out a manila folder thick with documents, spreadsheets, and highlighted research that represented weeks of careful investigation. The board members watched with growing unease as she opened it with the precision of a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. Since we're concerned about fiduciary responsibility, let me share some interesting discoveries I've made about Meridian Industries' operational efficiency and cost management. She placed the first document in the center of the table, a comparative analysis printed on expensive paper complete with charts and footnotes that immediately commanded professional attention. This is a breakdown of our building maintenance costs compared to similar properties in Manhattan, Isabella explained, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd spent countless hours verifying every number. Meridian Industries spends 43% less on building maintenance than the Manhattan average for comparable office towers. Board member Walsh leaned forward, his Boston accent sharp with skepticism. Where'd you get these figures? This information is public record, Isabella interrupted smoothly. Filed with the city for tax assessment purposes, cross-referenced with industry reports from the Manhattan Commercial Real Estate Association. I've also included comparative studies from Chicago, Boston, and Los Angeles for broader context. She pointed to a highlighted section on the document. The industry standard for a building of our size and age is approximately $2.7 million annually for comprehensive maintenance. We spend $1.8 million. That difference isn't because we have superior systems or newer equipment.
We're actually operating with infrastructure that's 15% older than the Manhattan average. Victoria Lang's perfectly manicured fingers drummed against the table. What's your point, dear? My point is that our below-market maintenance costs are directly attributable to the expertise and efficiency of our current staff, including the night shift custodial crew you want to eliminate. Isabella's gray eyes swept the table, meeting each board member's gaze directly. We're not spending less because we're being smart about budget allocation. We're spending less because we have people who care about this building like it's their home. She pulled out another document, this one bearing the letterhead of Morrison & Associates, Meridian's contracted maintenance firm. I requested a consultation quote from our current maintenance contractor. If we eliminate the night shift and expand their services to cover basic custodial duties, our annual maintenance contract increases by $87,000.
The number hit the room like a physical force. Several board members reached for the document simultaneously, their expressions shifting from dismissive to concerned. "That's impossible," Wright muttered, scanning the figures. "The elimination saves us $47,000 in salaries and costs us $87,000 in contracted services," Isabella finished. "A net loss of $40,000 annually, plus the hidden costs of reduced institutional knowledge, slower problem response times, and the learning curve inherent in any transition." Patricia Chen looked up from the documents, her expression troubled. "Isabella, how did you obtain these quotes? Morrison would need authorization from executive management to—" "I told them I was conducting preliminary research for a facilities optimization study, which isn't technically a lie. I also spoke with representatives from 3 other commercial maintenance firms. The quotes were remarkably consistent." She placed another set of documents on the table, these bearing the logos of companies that meant nothing to the board members, but clearly represented thorough research. Clean Corp Manhattan quoted $92,000 for equivalent services. Apex Building Solutions came in at $89,000. Superior Facilities Management quoted $95,000. Isabella's voice carried the satisfaction of someone who'd anticipated every possible objection. "The market rate for replacing our night shift custodial services ranges from $87,000 to $95,000 annually." Board member Thomas Wright was studying the documents with the intensity of an auditor discovering discrepancies. "These figures assume equivalent service levels." "Actually, they assume reduced service levels," Isabella corrected. "None of these companies provide the specialized knowledge our current staff possesses. None of them offer bilingual support for international clients. None of them include the problem-solving and maintenance support that Marcus, Dorothy, Miguel, and Carlos provide as part of their regular duties." She pulled out her phone and scrolled to a series of photographs she'd taken during her weekend documentation project. "For instance," she said, showing the first image to the table, "this is the executive bathroom on the 41st floor. The photograph showed gleaming marble fixtures and spotless mirrors. Dorothy Kim discovered that the original installation created a humidity problem that was causing microscopic mold growth behind the wall panels. Instead of reporting it through normal channels, which would have triggered a full environmental assessment and construction project, she researched the problem, identified the cause, and implemented a simple ventilation adjustment that solved the issue completely." She swiped to the next photo, a detailed close-up of ventilation grating with handwritten notes in careful script. "Her solution saved us approximately $15,000 in environmental consulting fees and $25,000 in reconstruction costs. She documented the entire process in case the problem recurred, creating institutional knowledge that benefits the company indefinitely." The photographs continued. Marcus Johnson's careful documentation of elevator maintenance schedules, Miguel Santos's hand-drawn diagrams of the building's quirky plumbing system, Carlos Rodriguez's detailed inventory management system that had reduced supply waste by 18%. "These aren't just custodial workers," Isabella said, her voice growing more passionate.
They're building systems experts who've developed specialized knowledge over years of careful attention to detail. They've become consultants who happen to empty trash cans, engineers who happen to mop floors. Board member Harrison Walsh set down his tablet with visible frustration. Ms. Blackstone, even accepting your research at face value, you're asking us to make corporate decisions based on sentiment rather than you're asking me to make decisions based on complete information rather than assumptions. Isabella shot back. You assumed custodial work was unskilled labor. You assumed these people were replaceable commodities. Positions could be easily replaced. You assumed the savings would be straightforward and the transition seamless. She gestured toward the spread of documents covering the conference table. I've provided actual data that challenges every single assumption underlying your decision. If you proceed with these terminations based on incomplete information, you're not fulfilling your fiduciary duties. You're gambling with shareholder value based on biases rather than facts. The accusation hung in the air like smoke after gunfire. Several board members exchanged uncomfortable glances, while Richard Blackstone's face darkened with a mixture of pride and exasperation. Isabella, he said, his voice carrying parental authority mixed with CEO command, you've made your point, but ultimately, this board has let me finish, Isabella interrupted, and the quiet steel in her voice made her father pause mid-sentence. Because I haven't gotten to the most important part yet. She reached into her folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper, expensive letterhead bearing the seal of Columbia University's School of Business. This is a letter from Professor Janet Morrison, who chairs Columbia's program in corporate social responsibility, Isabella said, placing the document where everyone could see it. She's agreed to supervise an independent study I'm conducting on the relationship between employee retention, institutional knowledge, and long-term profitability in mid-sized corporations. The board members leaned forward, their expressions shifting from dismissive to concerned. Meridian Industries would serve as my primary case study, Isabella continued, her voice carrying the casual confidence of someone dropping a nuclear weapon into a business meeting. Professor Morrison has connections with the Harvard Business Review, the Journal of Corporate Ethics, and several other publications that regularly feature research on corporate governance and decision-making processes. Victoria Lang's face had gone pale beneath her expensive makeup. You're talking about publishing internal company information? I'm talking about academic research on corporate decision-making methodologies, all perfectly legal, all properly supervised, all designed to contribute to the broader understanding of how successful companies balance profit maximization with sustainable business practices. She pulled out another document, this one bearing Columbia's official academic seal. I've already received preliminary approval for the study. Professor Morrison is particularly interested in the decision-making process surrounding the elimination of experienced staff members, the cost-benefit analysis methodologies used by boards of directors, and the long-term consequences of prioritizing short-term savings over institutional knowledge retention. The conference room had gone completely silent. Even the building's ventilation system had seemed to have stopped humming, as if the entire structure was holding its breath. Board member Wright cleared his throat carefully. Ms. Blackstone, surely you're not threatening to— Threaten? Isabella's eyebrows rose with genuine surprise. Mr. Wright, I'm a business student conducting legitimate academic research on corporate governance. There's nothing threatening about pursuing knowledge that might help future business leaders make more informed decisions. She smiled with the kind of innocent expression that had terrified prep school administrators for years. Of course, the study will be much more interesting if it can document both the decision-making process and the actual outcomes of those decisions. Professor Morrison is particularly interested in the possibility of tracking long-term consequences, measuring whether the projected savings actually materialize, documenting any unexpected costs or complications that arise, analyzing the broader impact on organizational efficiency and employee morale.
Patricia Chen spoke carefully, as if testing the temperature of dangerous water. This study, it would require ongoing access to internal information, which I already have as a shareholder and family member, Isabella replied cheerfully. Plus, academic research enjoys certain legal protections that make it quite difficult to suppress or interfere with, especially when it's conducted under university supervision. The threat was elegant, sophisticated, and completely devastating. Isabella had weaponized her privilege, turning her access and education into leverage that could expose the board's decision-making process to academic scrutiny and potential public criticism. Richard Blackstone stared at his daughter with an expression that mixed paternal admiration with CEO horror. She'd learned well, too well, from watching him navigate corporate warfare over the years. "There's one more thing," Isabella said, consulting her notes with casual precision. "I've also been in contact with the International Brotherhood of Maintenance Workers. They're very interested in Meridian Industries as a case study for their ongoing research into the economic impact of custodial staff elimination in corporate environments." She pulled out yet another document, this one bearing a union letterhead that made several board members visibly flinch. Union Representative Maria Santos, McGill's daughter-in-law actually, is completing her master's degree in labor relations at NYU. She's writing her thesis on the hidden costs of service industry job elimination in corporate environments and would love to use Meridian as a primary example of how corporate cost-cutting measures affect working families. The room felt smaller now, the air thicker with implications and potential consequences that stretched far beyond simple budget adjustments. "So," Isabella concluded, gathering her documents with practiced efficiency, "you have several options. You can proceed with the terminations and provide my research with a fascinating real-time case study in corporate decision-making under pressure. You can postpone the decision pending a more thorough cost-benefit analysis that includes the factors I've raised, or—" She paused, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. "Or you can acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, a 19-year-old with access to research resources and genuine curiosity about how businesses actually function might have discovered information that wasn't included in your original deliberations." Isabella stood up, slinging her backpack over her shoulder with the casual gesture of someone who'd completely dismantled a corporate board's carefully planned agenda. "I'll leave these documents for your review," she said, gesturing toward the paper-covered conference table. "Take all the time you need to verify the information and consider the implications. I'm sure you'll make the right decision." She walked toward the door, then paused with her hand on the handle. "Oh, and Dad," she turned back to face the table, her storm-gray eyes reflecting something that Richard Blackstone's chest tightened with recognition. "Marcus Johnson taught me that hope requires precision, that real leadership means caring about people whose names you don't know, whose stories never make it into board meetings, whose dreams are built $5 at a time." She smiled, and for a moment, Richard Blackstone saw his late wife's fierce compassion shining through her daughter's face. "I learned precision from him. I learned research from you. And I learned that sometimes the most important business decisions are really about what kind of people we choose to be when no one's watching." The door closed behind her with a soft click that seemed to echo through the sudden silence like the sound of a world shifting on its axis. For a long moment, nobody spoke.
12 of Manhattan's most powerful business leaders sat surrounded by documents that had just systematically demolished their carefully constructed justifications, staring at a door that had become a portal between the corporate world they understood and something more complicated, more human, more real. Board member Walsh was the first to break the silence, his Boston accent thick with grudging admiration. "Well," he said, consulting his tablet with the expression of someone discovering that all his maps had been drawn upside down, "that was thorough." Victoria Lang had removed her reading glasses and was cleaning them with mechanical precision, her usual composure cracked around the edges. "Richard," she said carefully, "your daughter is terrifying," Wright finished. "Absolutely terrifying. Where did she learn to conduct research like that? Where did she learn to leverage academic connections for corporate pressure?" added Patricia Chen, though her tone carried more admiration than criticism. That thread about the Columbia study was surgical in its precision. Richard Blackstone remained silent, staring at the documents scattered across the conference table like evidence in a trial he hadn't realized he was attending. Each page represented hours of work, careful investigation, and the kind of systemic thinking that business schools spent years trying to teach their students. His 19-year-old daughter had just outmaneuvered a room full of executives with decades of experience, armed with nothing but curiosity, access, and an absolute refusal to accept surface-level explanations. "The union connection," Walsh muttered, studying one of Isabella's documents. "That's the real problem. If this becomes a labor relations issue—" "It's already a labor relations issue," Patricia Chen interrupted. "We just didn't realize it because we were thinking about numbers instead of people." She held up one of Isabella's cost analysis sheets, her expression thoughtful. "These maintenance quotes, they're legitimate. I recognize the letterheads, know these companies' reputations. If she's right about the replacement costs—" "She's right," said a quiet voice from the corner of the room. Everyone turned to look at Elizabeth Harper, the 72-year-old former CEO of Manhattan Trust, who rarely spoke during meetings, but commanded absolute attention when she did. "Elizabeth?" Richard prompted. Elizabeth was studying Isabella's photographs with the intensity of someone reading ancient manuscripts. "I've seen this before. 30 years ago, Manhattan Trust went through a similar cost-cutting phase. We eliminated our building maintenance staff, contracted everything out to save money." She looked up from the photographs, her expression grim. "It was a disaster. The contracted services cost more, provided less, and we lost institutional knowledge that had taken decades to develop. It took us 3 years and twice the projected savings to get back to baseline operational efficiency." The admission hung in the corporate air like confession in a cathedral. But that's not the worst part. The worst part was discovering that our most experienced maintenance worker, a man named Robert Chen, no relation to Patricia Chen, had been preventing problems for years through small adjustments and early interventions that never appeared in any report. She gestured toward Isabella's documentation. "After we let him go, systems started failing that had been running smoothly for decades. Equipment broke down that had never required service. We had electrical fires, plumbing disasters, HVAC failures. All problems that Robert had been quietly managing through expertise we didn't even know existed." Patricia Chen leaned forward. "What happened to him?" "He found work with one of our competitors," Harper replied. "Within 2 years, their building maintenance costs had decreased by 30%, while their operational efficiency improved across every metric. Meanwhile, we spent 4 years dealing with systemic problems that could have been prevented by listening to someone whose knowledge was worth far more than his salary." She set down Isabella's documents with careful precision. "That young woman just handed us Robert Chen's story, except this time we have the opportunity to learn from it before we make the same mistake." The conference room felt different now. charged with the kind of energy that comes when fundamental assumptions crack open to reveal uncomfortable truths. The budget projections that had seemed so straightforward an hour ago now appeared as dangerous oversimplifications, corporate mathematics that ignored human variables and institutional realities. Richard Blackstone finally spoke, his voice carrying the weight of a man watching his daughter become someone he hadn't expected. "The research is solid?" "Better than solid," Walsh admitted reluctantly. "She's got primary sources, comparative analysis, industry benchmarks, and cost projections from multiple vendors. This is graduate-level business analysis." "And the academic study threat?" Patricia Chen consulted her own notes. "Legitimate and potentially devastating. Columbia's business school carries significant weight in academic circles, and Professor Morrison has published extensively on corporate governance. If this becomes a case study in questionable board decision-making—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. Every person in the room understood the implications of academic scrutiny, especially when combined with union interest and potential media attention. "There's something else," Wright said quietly. He was holding one of Isabella's photographs, the image of Maya Johnson in her graduation regalia, standing beside her proud father with his slightly crooked glasses and careful smile. "What?" "I know this girl." Wright's voice carried surprise and something deeper, recognition mixed with shame. "Maya Johnson. She applied for our summer internship program last year. Made it to the final round of interviews." The room went quiet. She was exceptional. Brilliant, articulate, passionate about infrastructure development. Her interview presentation on sustainable bridge design for rural communities was the best we'd seen in years. He set down the photograph with visible care. "We didn't select her for the program. Chose the son of one of our clients instead, a kid with half her qualifications, but better connections." Wright's expression carried the weight of recognition. "I never connected the name, never realized she was the daughter of someone who worked in our building."
Victoria Lang's voice was barely above a whisper. "How many others have we overlooked? How many talented people work in this building whose potential we've never recognized because we don't see them as anything more than service providers?" The questions hung in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore and increasingly uncomfortable to contemplate. Board member Martinez, who'd remained silent through most of the meeting, finally spoke. "There is a larger issue here," he said. "This isn't just about 4 custodial positions or budget calculations. It's about the fundamental disconnect between how we think this company operates and how it actually operates." He gestured toward Isabella's documents. "That young woman spent months learning about our building's real functional systems, not the organizational charts or the official procedures, but the actual human networks that keep everything running. She knows things about this company that none of us know, despite our positions and our access to information." The observation cut deeper than direct criticism. Here was a teenager with a backpack who demonstrated more comprehensive understanding of Meridian Industries' operational realities than the board of directors responsible for governing it. "So what do we do?" Lang asked. Richard Blackstone looked around the table at faces that reflected varying degrees of professional embarrassment, personal reflection, and grudging respect for the architectural precision of his daughter's corporate ambush. "We table the vote," he said finally. "We conduct a proper cost-benefit analysis that includes the factors Isabella raised. We evaluate the actual impact of eliminating these positions versus the projected savings." "And if the analysis supports her conclusions?" Harper asked. Richard was quiet for a moment, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows at Manhattan's endless sprawl, thinking about conversations in supply closets and hope written in blue ink, about daughters who learned precision from janitors and daughters who built bridges between worlds their fathers had never imagined. Then we find different ways to reduce costs, ways that don't require destroying people's lives to improve our quarterly reports. Patricia Chen was already making notes. I'll coordinate with the facilities management team for a comprehensive review. We'll need input from the maintenance staff themselves, their insights about operational efficiency and cost-saving opportunities. I'll handle the vendor analysis, verify Isabella's quotes, and explore alternative service arrangements. Wright nodded slowly. And I'll look into our internship and hiring practices. If we're missing talent because of unconscious bias or systemic oversight. The meeting was transforming from budget session to comprehensive organizational review, prompted by a 19-year-old with a backpack who'd refused to accept that good people were disposable variables in corporate equations. "There's one more thing," Harper said as the group began gathering their materials. "We need to acknowledge that Isabella didn't just save 4 jobs today. She saved us from making a decision that would have cost more than money." She gestured toward the photograph of Maya Johnson, still lying on the conference table beside spreadsheets and cost projections. "She saved us from becoming the kind of leaders who sacrifice institutional knowledge for short-term savings, who eliminate experience to improve quarterly reports, who treat human expertise as replaceable commodity."
Harper stood up, her 72 years of business experience lending weight to her words. "Most importantly, she saved us from becoming the kind of people who destroy hope without ever realizing what we've done." The board members filed out of the conference room in unusual silence, leaving behind documents that told stories they'd never thought to ask about, carrying questions that would reshape how they understood leadership, efficiency, and the complex mathematics of human value. Richard Blackstone remained alone in the room for several minutes after the others had left, staring at his daughter's research spread across the mahogany table like evidence of a future he was still learning to recognize. 44 floors below, Marcus Johnson was beginning his evening shift, unaware that his notebook full of hope and his daughter's college fund had just survived a corporate trial, defended by someone who'd learned that precision and compassion could be the same thing. 3 days later, Marcus Johnson was restocking supplies on the 38th floor when Patricia Chen appeared in the storage room doorway, accompanied by a tall man in an expensive suit who looked vaguely familiar. "Marcus?" Patricia's voice carried an unusual formality that immediately put him on alert. "I'm sorry to interrupt your work, but could we speak with you for a few minutes?" Marcus set down the box of cleaning supplies he'd been organizing, his mind racing through potential infractions or problems. In 15 years of night shift work, unexpected visits from human resources rarely brought good news. "Of course, Miss Chen." He wiped his hands on his uniform and straightened his wire-rimmed glasses, noting the way the stranger's eyes took in the meticulously organized storage room, supplies arranged with military precision, inventory sheets updated in his careful handwriting, safety protocols posted and highlighted. "Marcus, this is board member Thomas Wright. He wanted to meet you personally and discuss some observations about your work here." Wright extended his hand with the kind of genuine warmth that Marcus had learned to distinguish from corporate politeness over the years. "Mr. Johnson, thank you for taking the time to speak with us." They shook hands, and Marcus felt the slight surprise in Wright's grip, the recognition of genuine strength in someone he'd perhaps expected to be softer, older, more bent by years of night shift labor. "Is there somewhere we can talk privately?" Wright asked, glancing around the storage room. "This is fine," Marcus replied. He'd learned long ago that private conversations with executives could go either direction, and he preferred familiar territory for whatever was coming. Patricia consulted a tablet, her expression carefully neutral. "Marcus, we've been conducting a comprehensive review of building operations and cost efficiency. As part of that review, we've discovered some interesting information about contributions you've made that weren't reflected in our standard performance evaluations." She showed him the tablet screen, which displayed a detailed breakdown of his efficiency improvements, cost-saving suggestions, and problem-solving interventions over the past 5 years. Marcus stared at the list, recognition dawning slowly. Where did you get this information? That's an interesting story, Wright said, settling his tall frame against the doorway. Are you familiar with Isabella Blackstone? A smile broke across Marcus's face, the first genuine expression he'd shown since they'd arrived. Little bird. I haven't seen her in years. How is she?
She's the reason we're here, Patricia replied. 3 days ago, she presented this information to the board of directors, along with comprehensive research on the actual value of the night shift custodial staff. Marcus's expression shifted to confusion, then concern. I'm sorry, I don't understand. Wright pulled out a chair from the small desk in the corner, a gesture that transformed the storage room into something resembling an office rather than an interrogation space. Marcus, the board was planning to eliminate the night shift custodial positions as a cost-cutting measure, he said directly. 4 jobs, including yours. $47,000 in annual savings that looked straightforward on paper. The words hit Marcus like cold water. He'd suspected something was coming. There'd been rumors, whispered conversations among the day shift staff, the kind of corporate energy that usually preceded layoffs. But Isabella, Miss Blackstone, intervened. She presented research showing that eliminating your positions would actually cost the company money in contracted services, lost efficiency, and institutional knowledge. She turned the tablet around so Marcus could see the full cost-benefit analysis, complete with vendor quotes and efficiency metrics that painted a comprehensive picture of his actual value to the organization. She also shared some personal information about you and your family, about your daughter Maya, her college plans, the notebook where you track her college fund. Marcus felt heat rise in his chest. Not anger exactly, but the complicated emotions that come when private struggles become public knowledge. She shouldn't have. That's personal. She was trying to help, Patricia said gently, to make the board understand that the people they were discussing weren't just line items on a budget, but real individuals with families and dreams and contributions that go far beyond job descriptions. Wright leaned forward, his expression serious. Marcus, I need to tell you something. Maya applied for our summer internship program last year. Marcus nodded slowly. She mentioned it, said she didn't get selected. We made a mistake, Wright said simply. A significant mistake. She was the most qualified candidate in the applicant pool, but we chose someone else for reasons that had nothing to do with merit. The admission hung in the storage room air, mingling with the familiar sense of industrial cleaners and honest labor. I didn't realize she was your daughter until I saw her photograph in Isabella's presentation, Wright continued. I should have made that connection. I should have recognized that exceptional talent was right here in our building, that we were overlooking potential because of assumptions about who deserves opportunities. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing information that was reshaping his understanding of recent events. His daughter had spoken highly of the interview process, had been disappointed but not surprised by the rejection. She'd learned early that doors sometimes stayed closed despite qualifications and effort. There's more, Patricia said. The board has voted to not only maintain the night shift custodial positions, but to create a new category of employee recognition for institutional knowledge and operational expertise. She handed him an official letter on Meridian Industries letterhead. Effective immediately, you're being promoted to Building Operations Specialist with a salary increase and additional responsibilities that reflect the actual scope of your contributions. Marcus stared at the letter, the formal language blurring slightly behind his wire-rimmed glasses. The title change was more than cosmetic. It represented recognition, validation, and acknowledgement that his work had value beyond the maintenance of surfaces and the emptying of waste baskets.
The same promotion applies to Dorothy, Miguel, and Carlos, Patricia continued. Each of you will receive formal recognition for expertise that should have been acknowledged years ago. Wright stood up, his expression carrying something that looked like personal embarrassment mixed with institutional shame. Marcus, I also want to personally extend an invitation to Maya for this summer's internship program. If she's still interested, the position is hers. The offer hit Marcus harder than the promotion. He thought about Maya at the kitchen table, working on engineering problems with the focused intensity she'd inherited from him. Dreams of bridge building and infrastructure development filling notebooks that were cousins to his own careful calculations. She'll be thrilled, he said quietly. She's never stopped talking about sustainable design principles. There's something else, Wright continued. The internship comes with a scholarship component that covers college expenses for exceptional candidates. Given Maya's qualifications and our previous oversight, the board has approved a full scholarship package for her final year at NYU. Marcus sat down heavily in the storage room chair. The accumulated weight of unexpected recognition and financial relief combining into something overwhelming. The notebook in his shirt pocket, the one Isabella had seen years ago, filled with hope and precise calculations, suddenly felt lighter. Why? He asked finally. Why now? What changed? Patricia and Wright exchanged glances, and Patricia spoke first. Isabella changed, she said. She forced us to see information we'd ignored, to consider costs we'd never calculated, to recognize value we'd taken for granted. But more than that, Wright added, she forced us to confront the kind of leaders we'd become without realizing it, the kind of people who could eliminate jobs without understanding their impact, who could overlook talent because it didn't fit our expectations. He gestured around the meticulously organized storage room. She made us understand that this, your expertise, your knowledge, your commitment, represents the difference between a building that functions and a building that thrives, that the institutional knowledge you've developed over 15 years can't be replaced with contracted services or automated systems. Marcus was quiet for several minutes, absorbing the implications of recognition that had come from an unexpected source. He thought about Isabella as a 10-year-old crying in this same storage room, and how their conversation had been one of dozens he'd had with employees, their children, and the occasional lost soul who wandered into the building's quiet spaces looking for human connection. She always was special, he said finally. Even as a child, she saw things differently, asked questions that adults were afraid to ask. She still does, Patricia replied with a slight smile. The board meeting where she presented this research was, educational for all of us. Wright laughed, a sound that carried genuine admiration mixed with rueful acknowledgement. She's systematically dismantled every assumption we'd made about cost-cutting and efficiency. Then she threatened to make our decision-making process a case study in academic research on corporate governance. Threatened? Marcus asked. Not threatened, exactly, Patricia clarified. More like informed us that our choices would be documented and analyzed by experts in business ethics and labor relations, very politely, very professionally, but with the kind of precision that made it clear she understood exactly how to leverage academic and union connections for maximum impact. Marcus chuckled, the sound warm with recognition and pride. That sounds like Little Bird. She always had a talent for finding pressure points. She saved your jobs, Wright said seriously. But she also saved us from making a decision that would have cost the company money and damaged relationships with employees who've spent years contributing to our success. Patricia consulted her tablet again. Marcus, there's one more thing. The board would like to formalize the knowledge you and the other night shift specialists have developed about building operations. We're creating a training program where you'll help educate new hires and share expertise that's currently only in your heads." She showed him a preliminary curriculum outline. It's additional compensation, of course, but more importantly, it's recognition that institutional knowledge is a corporate asset that should be preserved and transmitted rather than lost when people retire. Marcus studied the outline, seeing his years of accumulated understanding translated into formal categories: HVAC, troubleshooting, plumbing system maintenance, electrical anomaly identification, emergency response protocols, vendor relationship management. "You want me to teach?" he asked. "We want you to share what you know," Wright replied, "to ensure that the expertise you've developed over 15 years becomes part of Meridian's permanent operational knowledge, rather than something that walks out the door when you eventually retire." The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. 3 days ago, he'd been facing termination. Now he was being asked to become an institutional teacher, to transform his quiet expertise into formal curriculum that would outlast his employment. "I'd like that," he said simply. "I'd like to help people understand how to care for this building the way it deserves to be cared for." Patricia smiled, the first genuinely warm expression she'd shown since entering the storage room. "We'll start with documentation of your current expertise, then develop it into formal curriculum over the next few months. Dorothy will focus on bilingual client services, Miguel on mechanical systems, Carlos on inventory management and cost control." "And Isabella?" Marcus asked. "What happens with her academic research?" Wright's expression became thoughtful. "She's continuing the study, but now it's focused on successful corporate adaptation rather than questionable decision-making. Columbia University is very interested in documenting how companies can identify and correct blind spots in their evaluation processes. So we're still a case study, but now we're an example of organizational learning rather than corporate short-sightedness." Marcus nodded slowly, understanding the elegant solution Isabella had created. Her research would continue, but instead of documenting corporate failure, it would analyze corporate growth, how institutions could evolve when presented with complete information and genuine analysis. "She's remarkable," he said quietly. "That little girl who cried in my supply closet grew up to save my job and change how this company thinks about its employees." "She learned from you," Wright replied. "She told us that you taught her about hope and precision, about the importance of caring for people whose names you don't know." Marcus felt tears threaten behind his wire-rimmed glasses. He thought about his notebook, about Maya's college fund growing $5 at a time, and dreams that had seemed fragile just a few days ago, and now felt solid as the building's foundation. "When can I start the training program?" he asked. Patricia and Wright exchanged smiles, the kind of expressions that come when difficult situations resolve into unexpected opportunities. "How about Monday?" Patricia suggested. "We'll start with documentation of your current expertise, then develop it into formal curriculum over the next few months." Marcus stood up, extending his hand to both of them with renewed confidence. The storage room around him no longer felt like a humble workspace. It had become the foundation of something larger, a place where institutional knowledge would be transformed into corporate wisdom. "Monday it is," he said. "And Miss Chen, Mr. Wright, please tell Isabella, tell Little Bird, that she kept her promise." Wright looked confused. "What promise?" Marcus smiled, touching the notebook in his shirt pocket. "She told me once that hope requires precision. She's proven that precision can protect hope." As Patricia and Wright left the storage room, Marcus remained alone among the meticulously organized supplies, surrounded by the tools of honest labor that had suddenly become the foundation of recognized expertise. He pulled out his notebook and opened it to the latest entry, Maya's college fund, now supplemented by scholarship money that would secure her dreams. Below the financial calculations, he wrote a new note in his careful handwriting. Hope preserved through the courage of someone who learned to see value where others saw only cost. 44 floors above, Isabella Blackstone was in her father's office, updating her Columbia research proposal to reflect a case study in successful corporate adaptation rather than institutional failure. The two of them, the janitor's daughter who'd become an engineer and the CEO's daughter who'd learned to bridge worlds, had created something neither could have accomplished alone, proof that precision and compassion could be the same thing, that hope protected was hope multiplied.
The transformation hadn't been limited to the custodial staff. The entire training program had become a model for institutional knowledge preservation that was attracting attention from other corporations and business schools. Harvard Business Review had published a preliminary article about Meridian's approach to employee expertise capitalization, and 3 other companies had sent representatives to observe the program. At the back of the room, Isabella Blackstone sat quietly taking notes for her ongoing research project. Now, in her sophomore year at Columbia, she'd switched her major to organizational psychology with a focus on institutional knowledge systems. The concentration that hadn't existed before her initial research had demonstrated its necessity. "Mr. Johnson?" another trainee asked. "What about the inventory management system Mr. Rodriguez developed?" Marcus's expression grew warm with professional pride. "Carlos will be here Thursday to walk you through his cost control protocols. He's reduced supply waste by 32% over the past year, and his tracking systems have been adopted by 3 other departments." He gestured toward the corner of the room where Carlos Rodriguez's detailed inventory charts were displayed alongside his community college diploma and his pending acceptance to NYU's business program. "Mr. Rodriguez exemplifies what this company has learned about recognizing talent. His analytical skills and attention to detail make him naturally suited for business management, and we're supporting his education while he continues to contribute his expertise to our operations." After the training session ended, Marcus and Isabella walked together through the building's quiet evening corridors. The floors gleamed under LED lighting that had been upgraded as part of the efficiency improvements funding, cost savings that had emerged from the comprehensive operational review triggered by Isabella's research. "How's Maya adjusting to the internship?" Isabella asked as they passed the conference room where 6 months ago a board meeting had nearly destroyed his family's future. Marcus's smile was answer enough, but he elaborated anyway. "She's thriving. The sustainable infrastructure project she's working on has attracted attention from the UN's development program. They've invited her to present her bridge design proposals at next month's conference on global infrastructure development." They stopped at the elevator bank, and Marcus pressed the button for the ground floor. "She told me last week that she understands now why I've always been proud of this work. She said she finally sees how taking care of things, buildings, bridges, people, requires the same kind of precision and commitment whether you're a custodian or an engineer." The elevator doors opened, revealing Dorothy Kim in her new building operations specialist uniform, a small pin on her collar indicating her certification as a bilingual client services coordinator. "Marcus, Isabella." Dorothy's English had always been perfect, but now she wore it with the confidence of someone whose linguistic skills were formally recognized as valuable corporate assets. "I just finished the training session with the new international client liaison team. They're amazed by how much technical translation work we've been handling informally." "Any interesting developments?" Isabella asked. Dorothy's expression grew excited. "The Korean electronics contract that we nearly lost due to communication problems, they've agreed to expand their partnership by 40%. Apparently, having someone who can explain technical specifications in both languages and who understands the building systems they're asking about made all the difference." As they rode down together, Marcus reflected on how dramatically the building's social geography had changed. The invisible people had become visible specialists. The night shift ghosts had become day shift consultants. The disposable positions had become institutional assets. "Isabella," Dorothy said as they descended past floor 32, "I wanted to thank you again for the letter of recommendation for my son's college applications.
Having a Columbia University student advocate for his potential made a significant difference.
Isabella waved away the thanks. Jin's scientific research on building air quality was brilliant. He deserved recognition from admissions committees who might not have understood the sophistication of his work. The elevator stopped at the 20th floor, where Miguel Santos was waiting with a tool bag and a satisfied expression. "Perfect timing," he said, stepping into the elevator. "I just finished installing the new monitoring system for the water pressure regulation. The sensors will alert us to variations before they become problems, but they're calibrated based on the baseline measurements I've been tracking for 8 years. "How's Maria's thesis coming along?" Marcus asked. Miguel's pride was unmistakable. "The defense is next month. Her research on hidden economic costs of service worker elimination is being reviewed by 3 major labor economics journals. She's using Meridian as the primary case study for successful institutional adaptation." Isabella smiled. "The union representative who's also your daughter-in-law, analyzing the company that almost fired you as an example of best practices in employee retention?" "Life has interesting symmetries," Miguel agreed, "though I suspect you had something to do with connecting her research to our situation." "I might have mentioned that her academic work would complement my Columbia research," Isabella admitted. "Academic collaboration produces better results than isolated studies." The elevator reached the ground floor, and they walked together through the marble lobby that Miguel's expertise kept gleaming, past security desks monitored by systems that Marcus had helped optimize, toward the revolving doors that opened onto Manhattan's endless evening energy. "There's something I've been meaning to ask," Dorothy said as they paused on the sidewalk outside. "Isabella, what made you decide to listen to our conversations in the first place? What made you care about people you'd known casually for years?" Isabella was quiet for a moment, watching the city's pulse flow past them, business people heading home to families, students rushing toward subway trains, delivery workers navigating between worlds of convenience and necessity. "I think it was the notebook. When I was 10 and hiding in that supply closet, Marcus showed me how hope could be quantified, how dreams could be built $5 at a time. It was the first time I understood that money wasn't just power. It could be precision, care, love measured in overtime hours." She gestured toward the building rising behind them. "I grew up thinking that important decisions were made in boardrooms by people with expensive suits and impressive titles. But Marcus taught me that the most important work often happens in places where nobody's watching, done by people whose names never appear in annual reports." Marcus adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, a gesture that had become automatic over years of careful attention to detail. "Little bird, you turned a lesson about hope into a revolution in how this company understands value." "We all did," Isabella replied. "I just documented what you'd already proven, that expertise and care and institutional knowledge are assets, not costs, that treating people as disposable variables is expensive in ways that don't show up on quarterly reports." 3 months later, Maya Johnson stood at the podium of the United Nations Conference Room in Geneva, Switzerland, her presentation slides displaying bridge designs that could transform infrastructure development in communities lacking traditional resources. The sustainable engineering principles she'd developed during her Meridian Industries internship were being reviewed by international development agencies for implementation in 6 different countries. In the audience, Isabella Blackstone represented Columbia University's new Institute for Institutional Knowledge Preservation, documenting how investment in employee expertise could generate innovations that extended far beyond the organizations that nurtured them. Back in Manhattan, Marcus Johnson was teaching his afternoon session on building systems integration, while Dorothy Kim worked with the International Client Services team on a contract negotiation conducted in 3 languages. Miguel Santos was consulting with Meridian's engineering department on infrastructure optimization, and Carlos Rodriguez was presenting his cost control analysis to the executive management team.
The Building Operations Training Center had become a model program visited by representatives from corporations, universities, and government agencies interested in understanding how institutional knowledge could be identified, preserved, and leveraged for organizational improvement. But the most significant change was harder to quantify and impossible to document in quarterly reports. Meridian Industries had become a place where people's potential was recognized regardless of their job titles, where expertise was valued wherever it emerged, where hope could be built $5 at a time and protected by those who understood its importance. The notebook that Marcus carried still contained careful calculations and precise records, but now it also held contact information for 3 other corporations that had hired him as a consultant, correspondence from business schools interested in his expertise, and a photograph of Maya at the United Nations building bridges between worlds her father had made possible to imagine. 5 years later, Isabella Blackstone Rodriguez stood in the Columbia University lecture hall where she now taught advanced organizational psychology, facing a classroom of graduate students who hung on every word of what had become the most popular case study in business ethics education. The Meridian model, as it had come to be known in academic circles, represented a fundamental shift in how corporations understood the relationship between employee expertise and institutional value. What had begun as a 19-year-old's desperate attempt to save 4 jobs had evolved into a comprehensive framework for identifying, preserving, and leveraging human capital that existed outside traditional organizational hierarchies. Professor Blackstone Rodriguez raised one student, a young man from Singapore whose business family had already implemented similar programs in their manufacturing operations. You've mentioned that the initial resistance came from the board's assumption that custodial work was unskilled labor. How do we identify similar blind spots in our own organizations? Isabella smiled, the expression carrying 5 years of research, 3 published books, and countless consulting projects that had transformed how businesses understood human potential. That's the essential question, she replied, moving to the whiteboard where she'd sketched the organizational chart that had guided her initial investigation. The first step is acknowledging that expertise exists everywhere in your organization, often in forms that don't fit traditional categories. She pointed to different levels of the chart. Look for people who've been with your company for years but have never been promoted. Examine positions that require problem-solving, relationship management, or specialized knowledge that goes beyond job descriptions. Ask yourself, whose departure would create operational problems that aren't reflected in their salary or title? A student from Mumbai raised her hand. But how do you quantify that kind of knowledge for budget purposes? Excellent question, Priya. Isabella turned to a new section of the board. The quantification process requires looking at indirect costs and hidden value. At Meridian, Marcus Johnson's efficiency improvement saved the company tens of thousands annually, but those savings were never attributed to him because they were not part of his formal responsibilities. She began writing figures on the board. Document problem-solving incidents, track cost savings from employee suggestions, measure the learning curve when experienced workers leave. Calculate the replacement costs not just for salary, but for institutional knowledge, relationship management, and operational expertise. The classroom was quiet, students taking rapid notes on methodology that was reshaping how their generation understood corporate governance and human resource management. But remember, Isabella continued, the most important measurement is qualitative, not quantitative. It's about organizational culture, employee morale, and the kind of workplace that attracts and retains talent. You can't calculate the value of knowing that your company sees potential in everyone, regardless of their current position. After the class ended, Isabella walked across the Columbia campus toward the new wing of the business school that bore her mother's name, the Isabella Blackstone Center for Institutional Knowledge Studies. The irony wasn't lost on her that her mother, who'd struggled with depression and never worked in traditional business, had become the namesake for a research center focused on recognizing unacknowledged contributions and hidden potential. Inside the center, she found Carlos Rodriguez working at one of the research terminals, his NYU MBA diploma hanging on the wall beside charts tracking the implementation of Meridian model programs in 47 corporations across 12 countries. "How's the quarterly analysis coming?" Isabella asked, settling into the chair beside his workstation. Carlos looked up from his laptop, his expression carrying the satisfaction of someone who'd transformed passion for numbers into recognized expertise. "The results continue to exceed projections," he said, pulling up a comprehensive dashboard. "Companies implementing institutional knowledge preservation programs show average efficiency improvements of 28%, employee retention increases of 43%, and innovation metrics that outperform industry standards by 35%. He clicked to another screen showing individual success stories. The manufacturing company in Detroit identified expertise in their maintenance staff that led to 3 separate patent applications. The hospital system in Phoenix discovered that their custodial crew had developed infection control protocols that surpassed official guidelines. The software company in Austin found that their security guards had been informally providing technical support that saved thousands in help desk costs. Isabella studied the data, still amazed by how consistently the pattern repeated itself across different industries and organizational cultures. When companies looked for expertise outside traditional hierarchies, they found it. When they invested in developing that expertise, it multiplied. "Any resistance patterns?" she asked. "Less than expected. The initial skepticism from upper management usually disappears once they see the cost-benefit analysis. The bigger challenge is cultural, convincing employees to share knowledge they've never been asked about before." He pulled up a case study from a logistics company in Memphis. The warehouse workers there had developed informal systems for optimizing loading patterns that improved efficiency by 15%, but they'd never mentioned it because nobody had ever asked them for their input on operational improvement. Isabella nodded. It was a pattern she documented in dozens of organizations, employees developing expertise that remained invisible because institutional structures didn't recognize or reward contributions that fell outside formal job descriptions. "Speaking of which," Carlos said, "Maya called from Geneva. The infrastructure project in Bangladesh is ahead of schedule and under budget. The bridge design she developed during her Meridian internship is being adapted for 12 additional sites." Isabella felt the familiar warmth that came from watching someone's potential unfold into global impact. Maya Johnson had become one of the leading experts in sustainable infrastructure development, her work connecting rural communities to economic opportunities through engineering solutions that prioritized local resources and environmental sustainability.
"And Marcus?" Isabella asked. "Teaching his 3rd corporate consulting session this week," Carlos replied with a grin. "Microsoft flew him to Seattle to help them develop a facilities management optimization program. He's booked through next summer with consulting requests." The transformation was complete, but ongoing. Marcus Johnson had evolved from night shift custodian to internationally recognized expert in institutional knowledge preservation. His methodology for identifying and documenting operational expertise was being taught in business schools and implemented by Fortune 500 companies. But more importantly, he'd become a symbol of something larger, proof that expertise existed everywhere, that human potential couldn't be contained by job descriptions or organizational charts, that wisdom often emerged from the most unexpected places. Isabella's phone buzzed with a text message from her father. "Board meeting at 3. Dorothy's presentation on international client development. Want to observe?" She smiled, remembering another board meeting in the same conference room 5 years earlier, when she'd been an eavesdropping teenager with a backpack full of research and a determination to protect people whose names the board didn't know. Now Dorothy Kim was presenting to that same board as Director of International Client Services, her bilingual expertise and cultural understanding having opened new markets that generated millions in annual revenue. The woman who'd once sung Korean lullabies while polishing marble floors was now negotiating contracts with multinational corporations and serving as cultural liaison for Meridian's expanding global operations. 2 hours later, Isabella sat in the renovated conference room, the same space where her intervention had saved 4 jobs and transformed a company's understanding of human value. The harsh fluorescent lighting had been replaced with warmer LED fixtures, and the intimidating oval table had been reconfigured into a more collaborative arrangement that encouraged dialogue rather than hierarchy. Dorothy stood at the front of the room, her presentation displaying revenue figures that would have been impossible to imagine 5 years ago. Behind her, floor-to-ceiling windows offered the same God's-eye view of Manhattan, but somehow the perspective felt different. less like corporate domination and more like collaborative oversight. The Korean Electronics Partnership has expanded to include semiconductor development and renewable energy infrastructure, Dorothy was explaining to board members, who listened with the attention of people who'd learned to recognize expertise regardless of its source. Our cultural liaison services have become a competitive advantage that's attracting contracts from companies who specifically want to work with organizations that understand cross-cultural communication. Isabella watched her father's face as Dorothy spoke, seeing recognition and respect that had replaced the casual dismissal that characterized board attitudes toward support staff just a few years ago. The transformation hadn't been immediate or easy. It had required consistent effort, documented results, and a willingness to question fundamental assumptions about how organizations functioned. The Jakarta project represents our most ambitious international expansion, but our success in Seoul and Busan have established relationships that make the Indonesian market accessible through existing cultural and linguistic connections. Board member Wright, the same man who'd once dismissed the night shift as disposable, raised his hand with a question that reflected genuine professional interest. Dorothy, what additional resources would help you expand these international partnerships? It was a question that acknowledged expertise, invited input, and recognized Dorothy as a strategic asset rather than administrative detail. The contrast with the board meeting 5 years ago was absolute. After the presentation ended, Isabella found herself alone in the conference room with her father, both of them looking out at Manhattan's endless energy stretching towards horizons that seemed wider now, more inclusive of possibilities they'd once been unable to imagine.
"Do you ever regret it?" Richard asked quietly. "The disruption? The complete reorganization of how we understand employee value?" Isabella considered the question seriously. The changes had been profound and sometimes difficult. Some board members had resigned rather than adapt to new expectations about employee engagement and institutional knowledge recognition. Several traditional consulting contracts had been lost when Meridian's approach to workforce development proved incompatible with conventional cost-cutting strategies. But the results spoke for themselves. Employee retention at historic highs, innovation metrics exceeding industry standards, client satisfaction levels that had made Meridian a preferred partner for international corporations seeking organizations that understood cultural complexity and operational excellence. "Never," she said finally. "But do you?" Richard was quiet for a long moment, studying his reflection in the conference room's polished surface. "I regret how long it took," he said finally. "I regret that it required my daughter's intervention to recognize value that had been right in front of us for years. I regret that Marcus Johnson had to work 15 years before anyone acknowledged his expertise. I regret that Maya almost lost her college funding because we couldn't see beyond job titles and organizational hierarchies." He turned to face Isabella directly. "But I'm proud of who you became, of how you learned to bridge worlds I never understood existed. You took the precision I taught you and combined it with the compassion Marcus showed you, and you created something neither of us could have achieved alone." 10 years later, the Building Operations Training Center had become the Meridian Institute for Institutional Knowledge Preservation, a research and education facility that attracted scholars, business leaders, and policymakers from around the world. The same storage room where a 10-year-old girl had once cried and a janitor had shown her hope written in blue ink had evolved into the epicenter of a global movement in organizational psychology and human resource development. Marcus Johnson, now 54 and internationally recognized as the foremost expert in facilities-based institutional knowledge systems, still wore wire-rimmed glasses that were slightly crooked and still carried a notebook in his shirt pocket. But the calculations had changed. Instead of tracking a college fund built $5 at a time, he documented the implementation of knowledge preservation programs that had transformed hundreds of organizations and thousands of individual careers. Maya Johnson Chen, she'd married Dorothy's eldest son, creating a cross-cultural bridge that reflected the international scope of her infrastructure development work, had established the Johnson Foundation for Sustainable Engineering Education, providing scholarships and mentorship for students from working-class families who showed potential in technical fields. Dorothy Kim had been promoted to Vice President of International Operations and served on the boards of 3 nonprofit organizations focused on cross-cultural business development. Her Korean lullabies were now sung to grandchildren who grew up understanding that her linguistic expertise had opened markets and connected cultures across continents. Carlos Rodriguez had founded his own consulting firm specializing in organizational efficiency analysis, but he maintained his office in the Meridian Institute and returned regularly to teach courses on hidden value recognition and institutional knowledge quantification. And Isabella Blackstone Rodriguez, now 34 and recognized as one of the leading researchers in organizational psychology, had written the definitive textbook on institutional knowledge preservation that was required reading in business schools from Harvard to Tokyo to Mumbai. But perhaps the most significant change was impossible to measure in quarterly reports or academic publications. The thousands of employees whose potential had been recognized because organizations had learned to look for expertise outside traditional hierarchies. The maintenance workers who became consultants, the security guards who became technical specialists, the custodial staff who became international liaisons, the administrative assistants who became process improvement analysts.
Each success story multiplied, creating ripple effects that spread through industries and communities as people learned that their knowledge had value, that their experience mattered, that their potential could be recognized and developed regardless of their current position or educational background. 15 years after a 19-year-old college student had hidden in a ventilation shaft to eavesdrop on a board meeting, Isabella stood once again in the same conference room, now renamed the Marcus Johnson Strategic Planning Center, watching a new generation of business leaders discuss the latest research on human capital optimization and institutional knowledge preservation. The discussion focused on emerging technologies for documenting and sharing employee expertise, but the fundamental principle remained unchanged. Every person in an organization possesses knowledge that could benefit the collective mission, and recognizing that knowledge was both an ethical imperative and a competitive advantage. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan continued its endless pulse of ambition and possibility. But inside the conference room, the conversation had changed. The questions were different. The assumptions had evolved. The understanding of human value had expanded to encompass potential that existed everywhere, waiting to be recognized and nurtured and celebrated. In the back of the room, a young research assistant took careful notes on methodologies that would shape the next generation of organizational development. Her name was Sophia Santos, Miguel's granddaughter, and she was completing her doctoral dissertation on intergenerational knowledge transfer in post-industrial organizations. The cycle continued, each generation building on the foundations laid by those who'd learned that hope requires precision, that expertise emerges everywhere, that the most important business decisions are really about what kind of people we choose to be when everyone's watching. The storage room where it all began still existed on the 38th floor, though it had been expanded and renovated into a comprehensive training facility, but preserved in a place of honor was Marcus Johnson's original desk, his wire-rimmed glasses from 2019, and a framed photograph of a 10-year-old girl and a 25-year-old janitor sitting together on the floor, surrounded by cleaning supplies and the kind of conversation that changes everything. Below the photograph, a small plaque bore an inscription that had become the motto of the Meridian Institute. Hope requires precision. Precision protects hope. Both flourish when we learn to see value where others see only cost.
And in the margin of every quarterly report, every academic publication, every consulting contract that emerged from the Institute's work, a simple reminder appeared. And that's how a 19-year-old student saved 4 jobs and transformed an entire company's culture. If this story inspired you, please subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest uploads, and let us know in the comments what you thought of Isabella's brave stand against corporate injustice. And that's how a 19-year-old student saved 4 jobs and transformed an entire company's culture. If this story inspired you, please subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest uploads, and let us know in the comments what you thought of Isabella's brave stand against corporate injustice.